All right, so diversity and inclusion, right? Do we all need to hear about it? I feel like I'm sitting in such an amazingly diverse room. My name is Tracy once again, and I am the lead at This Labs, a JavaScript consultancy. We do all things JavaScript. I'm also Google Developer Expert, Microsoft MVP, et cetera, et cetera. I just love all things JavaScript, so if it's JavaScript, you're probably finding me wandering around somewhere. Today, I get to talk to you about diversity and inclusion, and this is awesome because I don't actually get to talk about this topic very often. Usually when I go to a tech conference, they're like, but could you give a technical talk instead? And that's fine and everything like that, but these are two very important words that we're starting to hear over and over again, of course, right? And I want to go through a bunch of different things. So today I want to talk about defining D&I, why it actually matters, why does this matter in product and app development, how does it actually impact the bottom line, or does it? Hiring, retention, team culture, case studies of companies that are doing diversity and inclusion right. Also talking about how you can build the culture as well within your own companies, and how to solve that pipeline problem that we keep hearing about. So diversity, let's go ahead and define it first. For this talk, we're going to use Gallup's definition, and they say that diversity represents a full spectrum of human demographic differences. This is race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic status, and disability. They go further to say that a lot of companies actually consider lifestyles, personality characteristics, perspectives, opinions, even family composition, education level, or tenure, elements of diversity as well. And this means that if you're not respecting the idea of diversity, you're probably not even respecting your current team, right? Because what team doesn't have people with different personality characteristics? Then we look at this word inclusion as well. So inclusion refers to a cultural and environmental feeling of belonging. It can be assessed as to the extent to which employees feel valued, respected, accepted, and encouraged to fully participate within an organization. So I'm sure this resonates with all of you, because what type of, who doesn't want this for their own personal work environment, right? Like, if you don't feel like you belong in your company, you're probably not going to stay there for very long. Employees in inclusive environments, they feel appreciated for their unique characteristics and are therefore more comfortable sharing their ideas and other aspects of their true and authentic selves. Companies, according to Paul Pullman, who's the former CEO of Unilever, who have a more inclusive environment are companies that actually financially perform better. Isn't that interesting? So let's talk a little bit about why a diverse team matters actually for product design. And I'm going to start off with a funnier example. First I want to actually give you this metric here. So this is hilarious to me because 85% of product designers and engineers are men, while women influence and buy 85% of all consumer purchases. This is according to Fast Company. So, you kind of have to wonder, like, why is this? Why do we have this? It doesn't seem right? So, to my funny example, Beak, for example. So, in 2012, Beak released a Beak for Her pen, and these pens were pink and purple, and they were advertised as the perfect accessory, and they add a touch of personality, and they had a sleek design, and you could write beautifully with them. And so the internet also really loved Beak for Her, and they took to the internet, and they started writing these really hilarious Amazon reviews. So you can see here that Hulk hates the puny pen, he demands a Beak for him, and he wants to smash the pen. And then there were these really funny images of men writing with a Beak for Her, but they just couldn't because they weren't designed for men. So, we can take this example and say, hey, if they had more diversity on their team, would they have made this mistake? So if you've ever, this is actually a little bit more of a serious example where there wasn't a diverse enough team probably thinking through a product design. So this soap dispenser is used in a lot of different bathrooms, but unfortunately it can't actually identify dark skin. And manufacturers said, yeah, well, this is because of the cheap sensors, but you have to stop and ask, well, if that team had a more diverse set of engineers, would this have actually happened? Same thing with Apple, right? Yeah, so you can see that right there. It's a little bit of a longer video, but next slide. Apple, when they did their early release, they released it, and in 2015, people started taking to the internet and saying, hey, Apple Watch can't read my pulse. It couldn't detect contact with darker skin. And, again, we could call this a product problem, a technology problem. But if you look at Apple executives represented here, and, since a lot of companies have early testers for new products, you have to think, was it the lack of diversity at the top actually contributing to the fact that Apple Watch was released like this? You don't know, we don't know. We love Apple, but still. In a recent podcast by the Hansel Minutes podcast, Scott Hanselman interviewed Karen Catlin of Better Allies, and she shared this example. So when airbags were first being created, they were created for the average man, which means that they ended up killing a lot of women and children, right? Like, this is where product, design matters. It's a matter of life and death in a sense. So this is really scary, but this is kind of why I'm standing here talking to you about these things. Uber is something that we can all relate to. I do love Uber, so I'm not trying to pick on them. But Inc. magazine, when Uber started coming up with there was all this bad press around drivers sexually attacking women. You have to ask, would Uber with more women in technical roles have built better tools to protect female users from sexual attacks? I can't tell you how many times I've sort of stopped and paused and said, okay, am I feeling really comfortable getting into this Uber? So I can tell you that if I was a senior engineer there, I probably would have said, yes, this is very, very, very necessary. And then more simpler things. So, this is it's such a small thing, but it's also so impactful, right? Product and engineering teams that have more diverse backgrounds are able to make better, super simple decisions about prioritizing features. So, you can see here that Facebook has a lot of different gender types to choose from than just male and female. And this is a really big thing, but this is also a very impactful thing to make a more diverse product. It's the same thing, right? Like, when your team looks more diverse, you're able to make very, very simple, very impactful decisions, like making sure that stock photos actually reflect a wider audience than the normal traditional stock photos we typically see. So if that doesn't convince you why you need more diversity on your team, hopefully some of these examples you can take back to your teams if you're trying to convince your companies why this matters. But money always seems to talk, right? So does diversity actually affect the bottom line? Well, I took to Twitter and I asked, and Carla responded. She said that diverse teams are proven to perform better and ultimately make better financial returns. Todd Thibodeau, CompTIA CEO, he said that diversity efforts could net the IT industry an extra $400 billion in revenue a year. I don't know where that $400 billion is, but I want it just a little bit. And then he also says that a 1 percentage point move towards representative diversity leads to a 3-point increase in revenue. How crazy is that? Those are big numbers, that's a lot of money. And if you go a little bit deeper, you can look at this Diversity Matters report by McKinsey & Company, and they examined 366 public companies. And they found that companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely. You're 35% more likely to have financial returns above industry medians. Same thing for gender diversity, but it's 15% more likely. And then, again, not to pick on Uber, but the internet really loves Uber as an example. But you can see these numbers, right? So over the past 2 years, Uber's share of rides has dropped from 90% to 75%. If you look at when Susan Fowler's post on Uber being a hostile workplace, that was released February 2017. Literally between February and June, Uber's market share decreased by 3.5% and Lyft's market share increased by 3.5%. How insane is that, right? So it's insane to see the numbers and the direct consequence of not having an inclusive work environment. Another reason why this affects the bottom line, it's because disengaged employees cost companies up to $350 billion per year in lost productivity. And why does this matter? It's because that 83% of millennials are actually actively engaged when they believe that their organization fosters an inclusive culture, versus only 60% if they feel like they don't. So that's like a 23% loss in revenue based on productivity if you don't have an inclusive culture. So as employees are the biggest cost to any organization, let's talk about a little bit of tips on hiring, retention, and team culture and how you can actually improve that. So I took to Twitter again. I love Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter @LadyElite. Come talk to me. Come take selfies with me. But until a company has a more diverse team, they'll keep missing out on great job candidates because they checked out your team page and saw a bunch of white dudes. I went to another consultant's page the other day, and I was like, whoa, that doesn't seem right. So it matters, right? Jeff Walpley as well, he says that he's observed a lot of startups. It gets so much harder if you don't have a diverse team from the beginning, right? If you have a startup and there's 10 plus people and they're 90% male, then a lot of female friends, Jeff said, it feels like it's a little bit too bro-y, right? So it's really important to hire diverse from day one. So a few things that you could do to make sure that you're doing this. Number one is making sure that candidates are actually sourced through a variety of methods. So boot camps, et cetera, not just the traditional methods. Job descriptions should also have a gender-neutral tone. There's a lot of tools out there for you these days that allow you to do that. Make sure that you mention diversity on your career website so people know that it matters to you. And diverse candidates who interview should have the opportunity to actually meet with a set of diverse people, right? If you interview a female, let's say, and they meet only male employees, they might assume that this is the culture, where in fact it might not be. So let's look at some companies that have actually done diversity and inclusion really right. So I really love Salesforce example. So Salesforce has equal pay initiatives. They have spent over $6 million since 2015 trying to fix the gender wage gap. In 2016, they found that about 6% of employees had pay discrepancies and they had pay adjustments. And then in 2017, they found that actually 11% of Salesforce employees needed a pay adjustment, and that was $3 million that they spent trying to make sure that there was equal pay within the company. Pinterest has done a really amazing job at intentional hiring. So in 2015, they released the hiring rates for the goals, right, and the rates for underrepresented groups and made their hiring goals public. Now, what ended up happening over just a few years is that employees from underrepresented ethnic groups were able to triple from 3 to 9%. Women in tech roles increased from 21 to 29%. So small things over just a few years really made a big difference. And just like I said again, talked about, making sure that your diverse candidates actually meet diverse people, they require at least one woman and one ethnically underrepresented candidate to be on the interview slate, which is very, very, very important. Intentional hiring as well. So if you look at Atlassian, it's actually kind of amazing. I was really impressed with what Atlassian has done. So the first thing that they did when they said that they wanted to attract more female talent is they went to sponsor women in tech events. They created an intern program, right, to really start attracting people. And then what they were able to do, so they started this in 2015 where they had 15% of incoming graduates be women, right? And now that number is 60%. Isn't that crazy? 60% of their incoming graduates are women. That is so cool that you can just be intentional and then you yield some pretty intense results. LinkedIn has done a really good job at creating inclusive workplaces as well. So they have this Out at In resource group that offers executive sponsors and really strong ally group and community for LGBTQ employees. Alexander Ullman, who's the head of HR at LinkedIn, he says that a sense of belonging and inclusion ensures that all employees, regardless of their background or experiences, can be connected with equal opportunity to create a healthier and more successful future together with our employers. If you look at SAP as well, they have done a tremendous job as well. Miguel Castro, so first off, the fact that they even have a global diversity and inclusion office is awesome. But Miguel from there, he says that when people are comfortable and can express themselves in an authentic way, they're more likely to perform better, which increases engagement and contributes to the organization as a whole. They actually also have a virtual training program called Focus on Insight, which educates employees on diversity and inclusion. I wish this was free and I could give it to some people in the community, to be quite honest, but this is awesome. This is really awesome that SAP offers this. Unilever is big enough to actually say, okay, we're gonna focus on purpose before profit. And it's nice to have that flexibility, I guess, because we don't always get to do this, right? But Paul Pullman, who's the retired CEO of Unilever, really believed in this. And he said that he believes in purpose and doing purpose really well, which gives you profit. And he also said that diversity and inclusion in the workplace can lead to greater business potential. And he saw this across 190 different countries in all their different little subsidiaries. He says you can read it in the engagement scores, innovation, and ultimately profitability and return on investment. So one thing that Unilever focuses on is disability, right? And if you look at disability, over half the population is affected by disability, directly or indirectly. And that is a spending power of $8 trillion. That is so much money. This is why having a diverse team matters, because you really need to have people on your team that understand these types of things, that are able to focus not just on the typical profile that has come to affect us. So I talked a lot about companies, I talked a lot about things that other companies are doing, but let's talk about how to actually build an inclusive culture within your organizations. So it starts off with leadership, right? So if you create and encourage a sense of belonging in your workplace, it begins at that leadership level. The founders, executive teams need to have a desire to build a diverse culture and hire people who are open to working with people of all different nationalities, skin colors, genders, sexual orientations, etc. Carrie, again, Twitter, she said that you should use your platform, if you have one, to make certain topics safe to talk about. Because if that conversation is not already happening, it's probably not because it doesn't want to happen. It's because people are like, is this a safe place for me to actually speak up and say something? C-level leaders need to repeat that inclusion is a priority, and managers need to reiterate this message over and over and over again to make sure that the conversations are okay. Cindy, so she gave an example for Microsoft. So she said that one thing we did at Microsoft was ask some teams to aim for the power of three. 3 others must have true decision-making voices in big team decisions. I mean, that is really cool, right? And it's hard to do, but it's a start. Another thing you need to do, this is actually simple, and this is something that everybody can do, building an inclusive culture through meetings. So unfortunately, when women are a minority in the workplace, which is a lot of, almost everything in tech is like that, right? They're up to 33% more likely to get interrupted than their male colleagues. So make sure that you advise against interrupting colleagues when they speak, and encourage your managers, or if you are a manager, to give women or minorities credit to amplify their messages and make sure that they are getting recognized for the work that they do. Another thing you can do to just make sure that you have a more inclusive workplace is to send out agendas ahead of time. It's such a small thing, right? But this helps people who are shy and introverted and might not be so quick to jump up, people who have English as a second language, junior employees, so that they can collect and write down their thoughts ahead of time and participate more fully within those meetings. Judith says also, remember to stand up and speak out when you see a woman or a person of color singled out to take notes or make coffee, because it's so much easier for you who's not being targeted to do something and say something about that, because you're not as afraid of backlash, hopefully. I really love these quick tips as well. So bounce an idea off of someone unexpected, meaning if you continuously go to your tech lead, for example, maybe don't go to that person. Go to somebody that you wouldn't have gone to before. Change up your environment. Don't just sit at your desk. Go to the common spaces, go to a coffee shop, because as you change up your space, you're changing up your mindset, right? Which is why conferences are so great. They break us out of the stuff that we do, give us ideas, and then we can go back and kind of have clearer minds and thoughts and ideas. Rotate who runs your meetings. This is awesome too. Leave your assumptions at the door, of course, and then talk about something other than work. If you can connect with people on food or on family or on hobbies or things like that, then when there's disagreements in the workplace, it's so much easier to say, okay, well, we both like Indian food, so I won't be mad at you. Other things that you can do in the community, right, and within your workplace for women and underrepresented people to sponsor them is speak their name when they're not around, share their career goals with influencers, recommend them for stretch assignments, invite them to high-profile meetings, and endorse them publicly. Small little things that you can do that make such a huge, huge, huge difference. The other thing that is really cool, and I this is kind of a scary thing, right? Like, do you want to report your diversity numbers? Is your company diverse enough? It's kind of scary, but you can do this. Building an inclusive culture also means being transparent about what you're doing. So Carol Adams says, the company's willingness to publish shows an openness to address diversity issues, important, which incentivizes people to stay at the company. And what she found was that it actually affects people's perception of the workplace and job satisfaction. So you start seeing more women and ethnic minorities applying for promotions, whereas before they may not have bothered because they thought there was no point. Salesforce president, so the equal pay thing that Salesforce did, she said she was really, really nervous when she decided to do this. But ultimately it revealed a huge compensation gap between male and female employees, and they corrected it, right? Now they have a good reputation for doing so. And Courtney from Buffer, she says that publicly sharing numbers involves acknowledging company failures, but it's also an opportunity to be held accountable for future progress. And she said it's a healthy fear. It lights a fire under you. Also, making sure that you have metrics, right? Because what gets measured gets actually improved. So make sure to benchmark your company through surveys, identify areas of improvement, ask questions so you can actually see, are certain demographics actually having suboptimal experiences? And at the team level, understand, okay, who actually needs more support? Sure, we might have a diverse company, but maybe there's that one organization that's not so fabulous. So now the hardest part about building a diverse team is, of course, finding diverse hires. I look in this room and I'm like, well, nobody should have a problem here, right? But companies constantly come to me and say, where do I hire more diverse people? So unfortunately, in the UK, if you look at the UK, for example, all these statistics are starting to stack up against this whole idea of having more diversity and inclusion in tech, right? Only 20% of students in secondary education are female, and only 16% at the degree level, right, that actually choose to pursue computer science. In the West, so female participation is starting to plunge and has gone so since the mid-'80s, while female participation in other things like medicine and other scientific fields has started to increase, or has continued to increase. So the other problem is that major companies, even though they are very focused and devoted to things like trying to be more open about the process, releasing their diversity numbers, tons of companies are starting to do this now, none of them have actually been able to crack that 30% mark for women in technical positions. But the great part, this guy, Ryan Craig, he said, and this is great, this faster and cheaper education models like coding bootcamps have tremendous potential to diversify competitive workforces. And I think we've all seen that, right? And if you look at the numbers, so if you look at coding bootcamps, for example, this is Course Report's demographic study of US bootcamps, and they found that 43% of coding bootcampers were women compared to 15% of university CS majors. And this is the same with Blacks and Latinos, 25% versus 10%. So these numbers should really encourage recruiters to look beyond fresh college grads when hiring for entry-level development positions. But still, what is stopping that ratio from changing? Hiring bias, right? The gatekeepers. So while there is a large group of women and underrepresented minorities now learning development, when it actually comes to the interview process, it's hard because we all tend to have that implicit bias. So we tend to recruit those who are culturally similar to ourselves. And this means that white male engineers tend to recruit white male engineers. And the other problem is, we're still not having that diverse leadership in our workforces, right? Over 70% of tech companies actually have no female board members, and over half of them have no female executives. Ouch. There's also a huge retention problem in tech. So women are leaving. Why is that? There's a statistic by Next Generation that says that women are actually 45% more likely to leave tech within the year than men. And you might think getting married, having babies. No. Family reasons are actually not the primary reason for their departure, but rather it is the feeling of isolation, the macho culture, the lack of sponsors. And again, this goes back to that problem we talked about of inclusivity, right? So we can kind of summarize all the different issues of finding and keeping diverse hires kind of into like 4 key areas. Diverse hiring pipelines, you need to adopt them. Hiring bias, you need to address it. Teams need to start growing their next diverse leaders, so there are more diverse leaders within an organization. And inclusive cultures need to be created to actually retain anybody. So I thought to this. I mean, we have a consultancy. I love helping companies, but I also need like a higher purpose. So we decided to start this apprentice program, and we thought, let's solve this problem. Like, we can solve this problem together, right? So we created this Hire the Fempire program to try to help companies succeed in changing the ratio. And we do super simple things. We provide a steady pipeline of diverse candidates through all these amazing partnerships with boot camps and diverse organizations. We actually do the hiring for people, so this allows for equal opportunity because, you know, it's an unbiased interview process and a diverse hiring committee. We also do this pairing and try to help teams grow their next diverse leaders. So our engineers, who are junior engineers, they actually come paired with senior architects to mentor people for a few months and get them, you know, into their positions in good ways and teach them how to be leaders. We also try to teach people by just having them watch us, right? As we're working with teams, we're sort of showing people how to facilitate sort of inclusive cultures within an organization. So I love that. I love being here. Thank you so much for having me. We talked about a lot of different things today. Hopefully some of it stuck. Hopefully some of those statistics you can bring back to your organization. I have these slides online, so feel free to chat with me any single time. And I'll just leave you with the idea that, like, you can't just hope that diversity is going to happen, right? You need to actually work at it. You need to believe in it and take the risks within your organizations, within the communities, to make sure that we make this continuously something that we continue to strive for. So my name's Tracy again. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLead, and thanks for having me.